This session is meant to be informational and educational. The information provided is an overview of strategies that can be applied to your participants after immediate loss of job and during the transition to new employment. Today, Laura Allen, a volunteer financial mentor, will be presenting. Laura is new to the team. We're lucky to have her. She is enhancing our pool of skills and entrepreneurial experience in management consulting and people operations. She believes financial peace of mind is found through financial clarity and strives to help individuals master their money. And with that, I'll let Laura tell us more.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Just first off, it's an honor to be here. This is my first Nibble Network, and I get to present, which is great. And it is also a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. It's very important to me. Not only have I been impacted personally by layoffs and job loss, my husband was laid off early last year, my sister as well. I've had a lot of friends, but I also come from the HR side, so I'm a career switcher. I was most recently head of HR for a tech company here in Chicago, and I had to go through almost 5 rounds of layoffs, I would say. It was 4 to 5 rounds of layoffs. And so I've been on the other side and I'm excited to pay that forward and share my experience, having been on the HR side of things, on how to help your participants through job loss, or layoffs. And so, what we're going to cover today is first and foremost how to build financial resilience. I think it's really important to even start thinking about this, obviously, prior to any termination events happening. And then also recognizing the emotional impact and stages that happen as a result of job loss. Uh, as a result of job loss, it's really important to adapt your approach as mentors, and then immediate action steps you can take, and then short-term planning to help them get back on their feet. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So step one really happens hopefully before any termination event happens, and that is getting prepared ahead of time. So building and maintaining a 3 to 6 month emergency fund is really important, depending obviously on their specific situation. And then having really clear visibility into cash flow, I know can be difficult, but it's important because that will really help you understand what expenses can be scaled back if income is disrupted. And then this third point, so I feel like the first two most people on this call is probably familiar with, but this third point I think is really important as mentors that we can help participants think about, especially for people who are earlier on in their careers, encouraging them to keep their resume up to date as much as possible, as well as their LinkedIn profile. This is something I'm certainly guilty of. I'm in a job and I stop thinking about just making sure I'm jotting down any accomplishments I have when big projects wrap, promotions, all of that. Really encourage your participants to think about those and keep their profiles updated because it's just one less thing that they'll have to think about if they're suddenly out on the job market again, and having to go and do that job searching. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, and step two is actually not about finances at all. So, job loss, I think, like many things related to money, is about emotions just as much as it is about finances. So, losing a job can trigger some really strong emotional responses that prevent people from acting and thinking rationally. And many people, my husband included, reported that the experience of going through job loss is very similar to going through the stages of grief. So there are emotions, there's obviously a wide range of emotions, but some things that your participants could be going through is anger, fear, denial. Obviously, there's anxiety. Shame is a big one. So a lot of people are embarrassed to even talk about it, which can be difficult. And then shock and depression and panic. These are all, they'll present differently. Not everyone will experience them, but just it's something to keep in mind. I know most of us on this call are probably planners, myself included. I want to jump into action when really most people aren't ready right away to jump into action. There are some small actions I suggest that you take, but beyond that, it's really about just making sure that you're honoring their emotions. So, um, to double down on what I said about the emotions of job loss feeling like grief. So this is sort of the classic stages of grief that I'm sure most of us has heard about. It's not always linear like this. Obviously, people don't go through it in exactly this order, but I thought it could be helpful to think about how you can adjust your role as a mentor depending where people are along this emotional journey. So, in the beginning, there's oftentimes shock, and denial. And really, at this point, we as mentors can just be the anchor. So prevent any rash decisions, make sure they're not doing anything when they're not able to really process those emotions. And you can also be a listener, just let them process, let them talk. It doesn't really mean you need to do any sort of financial planning at this point. It's really just about letting them um, feel their emotions and really process through them. And then once they're through that, that's when you can start to be the architect and to build a plan. So just something to think about how you can adjust your role as a mentor, depending again on where they are along this curve. Okay, so I know I talked about don't jump right into planning, but of course there are some immediate actions that you can help them take. So first and foremost is to review their severance agreement. So severance agreements aren't always offered, but if they are, just know that they don't need to be signed right away. And participants, employees should not feel the pressure to sign right away. They typically have at least a week, up to 4 weeks, so they should have time. And to help them review their severance agreement. So these agreements, and again, I was head of HR and our legal team would give us these severance agreements, and they were difficult for me to understand. They're very legalese. It can be difficult. So it's probably really helpful if they're comfortable having you read through it and just understanding what's in there. So it should list what their severance amount is. It should list if they are owed any unpaid PTO and also what their health benefits coverage will look like. And just to remember, this oftentimes caused a lot of confusion for employees is that whatever amount is quoted in the severance agreement, that is subject to regular income tax. So they'll see an amount, they'll sign the severance agreement, and then different amount will hit their bank account, and that can cause some confusion. So just something to be aware of. Um, Also help them to understand how long their benefits will last and what their COBRA options are. So typically, your health insurance will last through the end of whatever month that you are terminated in. So for instance, if someone was terminated on January 1st, they would automatically have health coverage through the end of the month. It just keeps it easier, honestly, for the carriers. So you would have it through January 31st. On the flip side, if you are terminated on January 30th, you would only have benefits through the 31st. So it really depends on when the termination event happens, but just making sure that they understand how long they'll have coverage of those health benefits. And then there's also COBRA, which I've been in the industry for a long time. I can never remember what COBRA stands for. It stands for Consolidated Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act. I had to write that down. I do not have it memorized, but it basically allows employees and their families to temporarily stay on their employer-provided group health insurance for 18 to 36 months after losing their job. Um, it's a it is a good option. Just know it can be incredibly expensive because you get to stay on the employer provided group health insurance, but they are no longer subsidizing it. So it's a very expensive option. So I would encourage your participants to consider exploring marketplace options if that's available for their health situation. Obviously, it's not always easy just to move doctors or to move plans. So just keep that in mind. And then lastly, file for unemployment. So this is a state-by-state case. In most cases, you can file online, but they can call if they need to. Again, it just depends on the state. And then a little pro tip is that some state unemployment offices have social media accounts, which can be one way to get resources for guidance. So just something to be aware of that might be helpful. And I wanted to pause here before we move on to the next step because I do think there are some questions that you should empower your participants to ask HR if it is not provided. So typically, HR, when they have the conversation or during the termination or during the layoff, they'll run through a lot of this information, but I've seen this a lot. Once you're being told you're losing your job, it's very hard to sit and process any more information. So if they feel like they didn't get clarity on any of this, it is totally within their rights to reach out to the HR contact and get clarity on this. So understanding when they will receive their final paycheck, and I'll try to make this as clear as possible. So there's two pieces to this. You get a final paycheck, and then if and when you sign your severance, you'll also receive a severance amount. So the final paycheck is basically just paying for whatever days they've worked past the last pay cycle. So they should get clarity on when they'll receive that paycheck and then also their severance agreement if they do end up signing, whether or not they'll get PTO or vacation paid out, benefits and COBRA, like we said. They can also ask about outplacement services. Oftentimes, HR won't proactively talk about this. And if they do, sometimes it's not heard. So just making sure that they're understanding what is being offered by the company. And then also referral letters. This can be really, really helpful. And most of the time, HR is more than happy to procure one for them and send it to them. They'll just have to ask. And I would say, again, having been on the other side, a bonus tip is just do not be afraid to ask. Really empower your participant to ask politely about what they might be able to get. There's no harm in asking, and a lot of people just don't do this. So it's something to think about and to help your participant. Okay, and then moving on to step 4. So this is once everyone has processed their emotions and it's time to really think about, okay, what is the short-term contingency plan? So first and foremost, determining what their runway is, which would be whatever severance amount they receive plus the emergency fund that we talked about, reducing non-essential spending as much as possible where it makes sense, switching debt payments to minimums. We'll talk about debt in a little bit. And then if necessary, pausing any investing or saving in the short term, just so you can be really focused on cash preservation. And then speaking of cash, I think it's important just to run through how to prioritize the different sources of liquidity or different sources of cash that you can draw on or think about for your participant to draw on when they don't have regular income. So first and foremost, there's the severance and unemployment checks. This is income replacement and hopefully can be used before touching or dipping into any savings. Just note, and this, I've seen it happen a lot of different ways. Sometimes severance amounts are paid in a lump sum. So even if someone gets 3 months of severance, it'll come in one large lump sum into their direct deposit account. So just that has to be prorated over the next couple months. And it's something you can certainly make sure that your participant understands that it can't be spent all at once. That's supposed to last over the next couple months. The emergency fund. So I think oftentimes people get or experience anxiety about spending down their emergency fund, especially if it's something they've worked hard to build up. It's a bit of a safety net. And then once you're there, it can feel anxiety inducing to spend it. So you as a mentor can really give permission and help them feel okay spending down this emergency fund because it is for emergencies. This is what it's for. It's so that you don't necessarily have to dip into your savings or investments. And it can be replenished. So just making sure that they feel okay being able to leverage this money when they need it. And then after that, if taxable brokerage accounts is something that's available to them and is an option, that is something that they can certainly start using. And it is oftentimes considered just better than reducing the amount of money that they have in their tax advantaged accounts. Roth IRA contributions, so anything that they have contributed to a Roth IRA, the original amount, that's already been paid, they've already paid taxes on it. So that can be withdrawn at any time for any reason, tax-free and penalty-free. Just make sure that it's obviously not any of the capital gains or the growth that they received. It's just the original contributions. And then finally, there's their 401k and traditional IRA. So this isn't ideal, obviously, just because there are some penalties for anyone who withdraws under 59 and a half. But it is certainly an option, and it's a temporary measure that can be rebuilt, especially if you're earlier on in your income earning years. It is certainly something that they can rebuild. So just keep that in mind if they feel defeated or anxious about getting to that point. It is certainly an option that they can use. And then, of course, ideally, you won't have to progress past these first two sources, and hopefully they can get back on their feet before dipping into any savings or investments. Okay, so I am by no means an expert in student loans, but I felt I would be remiss if I didn't address some of the options that you have, because these are oftentimes fixed costs that people early on in their career need to think about. And so I wanted to list some of the options that are available. We are in this fun transition plan where the one big beautiful bill is hitting, and I am not an expert in the one big beautiful bill, but there is the repayment assistance plan, which is just a new income-driven repayment plan. There's a ton of acronyms. I'm so sorry. But it's just a new version of that, and it should become available by July 1st of 2026 of this year. And it's basically just, again, an income-driven repayment plan where if annual income drops below $10,000, you can go as low as $10 a month, which could be a really good option. This also includes interest subsidies, which is helpful because it will prevent the balance from growing. So that's great. And then if your participant is part of a public service loan forgiveness program, just note that an IDR or an RAP, so sorry for all the acronyms, it is a really good option because deferment and forbearance do not count towards the total payment. So just something to think about if they are on a PSLF. There's also unemployment deferment. So if they're on a subsidized loan, and legacy just means dispersed before July 1st, interest can be paused, but it will require proof of unemployment benefits or active job search. And then if they have a private loan, they can contact the lender, which is typically a bank, and speak to their hardship department. And the name changes, I think, lender by lender, but they can certainly speak to someone and talk through what their options might be. And then there is forbearance, which is a short-term pause. Just note that interest still accrues. And then after 2027, which still feels a little far away, but after 2027, there will be a limited amount. So you're limited to only 9 months within a 2-year period. So just something to keep in mind. So that's student loans. And then there's also consumer and mortgage debt. So I would say the headline here, I know there's a lot of information on this page, but the headline here is being proactive is best. So reaching out before you miss a payment is much better. You get a lot more flexibility, you get more options, and this is where you as a mentor can really encourage them to be proactive in reaching out and getting help. Many lenders offer hardship programs and can speak to them about it. Please help participants avoid predatory solutions. Something my father has always said my whole life, and I think applies here, is if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So just make sure that, again, they're being rational and thinking through if something sounds too good to be true, it definitely is. And then there are some really great free and trusted support to think about their debt options. There is the Department of Housing and Urban Development, which will give unbiased guidance on mortgage payment options. There is the NFCC, which just helps give credit card counseling or lender negotiations. And then there's the CFPB, which provides process and scripts for talking to lenders and talking through the different options that you have for your debt payments. Okay. I feel like I have been talking for a very, very long time, but just to summarize, so these are the key takeaways from today. I hope this information was helpful. But first and foremost, being proactive prevents some panic later down the road. So 3 to 6 months of emergency funds, cash flow clarity, and an updated resume or LinkedIn. I want to double down on that third point. It's probably my HR hat coming through, but I think that can be really helpful. Emotional support as a mentor here can be just as important as financial guidance. So just making sure that you understand that oftentimes there are emotions that need to be processed. Also helping them and empowering them to advocate for themselves. So this is a step a lot of people miss. And I saw this honestly when I was on the HR side of things. So encourage them to ask, obviously politely, communicating politely with HR really unlocks probably a lot of surprising things. So just make sure that they are asking for what they might need and getting clarity where they need to, and also being proactive with lenders and then using money in the right order. So thinking through what's the best way to pull for whatever cash reserves they have. And that is it. I don't know if I went too quickly or too slowly, but here we are.
So if this is your first time doing a Nibble and Network, this is the fun part where you get to choose what you do next. You can stay here in the main room and ask any questions that you have for Laura. We also have two breakout rooms, one if you'd like to network with other third decade mentors, and another one if you have any questions or you need some general third decade support and you've been meaning to connect with a member of the third decade mentor team. These breakout rooms are open, so you are able to join whichever one you see fit as this time. And again, if you would like to continue to stay in the main room and ask questions, hear the discussion, you're welcome to stay in here as well.